ArcGIS Online and SharePoint for remediation monitoring. Tips for the non-GIS user. When I first submitted this abstract, it was supposed to be a 15 or a 20-minute presentation. Since it's been condensed, I've really condensed the materials in this presentation. The remediation site that we're talking about is actually shown on the left-hand side of this picture. This is a construction picture during active remedial activities. A little bit about the project. The work that we were doing was for a Superfund site up in Northern Maryland, and EA has been supporting this site for about 20 years. There was an existing regulatory record management website, and we were replacing this website as it was obsolete. A little statistics about the site: there are 630 sample locations, over 250,000 sample results. First sample result actually dates back to 1984, and there were over 1,000 documents that needed to be managed. And so that's really why we went with the SharePoint and ArcGIS Online mashup, is for that documents. So since we had an existing site, we were able to review that existing site and document all of the requirements. And that included managing those historical documents, adding new documents. But when we got to getting the data, this is where we started using that ArcGIS Online applications, how we could export the data, view the sample results geospatially and temporally, or create a graph. As I'm talking about those requirements, I'm sure you guys are already thinking of widgets. But the first tip I have for you guys is make sure you write out your requirements and then identify your solutions. And some of these requirements, because of the intricacies and the cascading effects of the widgets, we had to really configure the whole widget to meet all of the requirements. We couldn't just do it piecemeal. And I'll actually have a great example of that towards the end. So here's the portal. Simple SharePoint site. On the left-hand side, there's documents and there's maps. For the document section, the user was really comfortable with folder structures. There was an existing folder structure in the existing site, so we maintained the folder structure for them to manage their documents. And this is the second tip, change management. This is a whole new website for our users, but because we maintained that familiar user interface of folder structure, they were more apt to accept the new platform. How do you insert a web map into SharePoint? Let me go through these steps really quickly. You go to your SharePoint site, you hit Page and Edit. From Page and Edit, you'll get a new toolbar that says, you go to the Insert, hit Media and Content, select a page viewer. When you insert that page viewer on the bottom of your screen, you will edit that page viewer by hitting Edit Web Part. Once you edit the page viewer, this is where you finally get that location to add your URL for your web map. The other thing we ended up doing in this specific location is changing the dimensions of the web map. We made it a fixed dimension, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But once you've entered in the appearance and your URL, you hit Apply, and here it is. Your web map is now embedded in your SharePoint site. Talking about those fixed dimensions, the reason we ended up doing that was so on the right-hand side, you see this frequently asked questions. This is another tip. For non-GIS users, it's not as intuitive. The ArcGIS Online platform is not intuitive for them. So having a side-by-side help really improves the opportunities for success for those users. Next thing we included was we put all of the widgets in the same location so that the users only had to go to one location to activate any of the tools. And the third tip I have is about the layer list. And there was a lot of data, 250,000 sample results. But in order to improve the load time of this map, we really minimized the data that was visible. In order for a user to get access to the information, they need to initiate the layer list. And so by putting the layer list on the map when they first log in, it helps initiate that first step for the user. Now they know that they have to click something to access that data. So tip 3, provide easy access to help with frequently asked questions, preferably side by side. Tip 4, group your widgets together so that your user can just have to look in one location. And tip 5, initiate that first step for your user. The next tip I have is the user wanted to be able to turn on specific layers at the same time. And it ended up being actually a 3-tiered approach. In order to do 3-tiered grouping, you have to use your services. And so for us, we ended up using ArcPro and created individual maps in the ArcPro that corresponded to that service grouping. So tip number 6 is use ArcPro to create individual maps so you can have that 3-layer grouping. Our final example tip for you guys is definition queries. As I said, there's one feature class that has 250 sample results, but the user wanted to see those results in a different for specific analytes at specific locations. So we ended up using definition queries off of that one feature class to symbolize that data differently. And we symbolized it for tetrachloroethane, trichloroethane, chlorobenzene for the analytes listed on the right-hand side. But because of that, we also set up our widgets. We ended up setting up 9 or 10 widgets, a time slider widget, the filter widget, the chart widget, and the table widget off of the same feature class, so that when the user enabled one of those widgets, it kind of cascaded through the rest of them. So in this example, the user activated the chlorobenzene filter, got the chart that only showed the chlorobenzene results, and then finally got a table that only showed the chlorobenzene results. So because everything was filtered off of one feature class, it cascaded through the rest of the widgets. So the tip number 7 is use a definition query to visualize the data, but then configure off of one feature. Because in the abstract, I mentioned the security. Let's talk about how you set up security really quick. In ArcGIS Online, when you add a web service and you have a username and password, how did you get to this point? So you go to your Arc Server Manager. In security, you add a user, and part of that user, you create a role. In this case, we've made the user actually the role type of user because we're using map services. Once you've created your user and your role, then you go into your services. You select that service group, hit the lock, assign that user to that service group, and then you go to your ArcGIS server REST API, use that username and password that you just created, grab those URLs, copy those URLs back into your ArcGIS Online web map, and use the same username and password that you just created in your Arc Server Manager. So with that, here are the take-home tips for you guys. 7 tips for a 7-minute presentation. And if I went too fast, or if you'd like to see this again, please visit EA's virtual exhibit booth.